Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the recent GAS conference. That's the Global Anti-Scam Summit, which happened in DC, which a number of our team attended. And both Nathan and Simon were there. And it would be great. I mean, Simon is, as he's mentioned, very new to our organisation and actually very new to the whole sort of scam fighting world. And I just wanted to have a sense from you about how your sort of introduction to that world was and how you found the conference overall.
Yes, I mean, I've been fascinated in getting into this area. So for me, it was obviously a very strong learning point. I think what you realise is how broad the community is that's being brought together. So I mentioned the lady on the stage who was sharing about her own victim journey, which is terribly difficult, through to extraordinarily technical conversations with people. And then you've got like FBI and Federal Trade Commission and others from government in the room having a conversation with you as well. So it's fascinating to see, for me to see. I really like the way that communities and groups work together on issues. And for me, it was fascinating to see that breadth and also the keenness. I think we are at a moment in time where perhaps the levels of scamming are at such a high volume that we are looking at a situation where everyone's interested in doing more. So inevitably there's a positive engagement because of that, which is great. It still seems to be technically quite challenging to deal with this as an issue at scale. So I was very aware that a lot of what was being done was still quite small pilots and quite small scale takedowns, when actually we need an awful lot more to be done if we're going to really turn the tables on this.
Yeah, and you mentioned, I think, in the last item, a bit about there being the keynote speech from somebody who'd been affected by a sort of personal scam, and I think these conferences often have that as a sort of feature. But I mean, was that the scale of that fairly eye-opening to you in terms of the sheer amount of effort that some of the scammers go to?
Yes, I suppose I hadn't fully appreciated the area of what they call pig butchering. So taking people on a much longer, like several months long journey in which they are engaging with this fictitious character, and that person is behaving so rationally and realistically that these perfectly able, intelligent and well-educated people are taken in completely, and that is amazingly disturbing because I can imagine it happening to people around me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think probably, quite encouraging to see the number of people that were at the conference and engaging with this really important area as well. I think they often quote the stats, but I think we're talking about the size of a small country in terms of the sort of the revenue generated by scammers, and it's it's a problem that's not, as we know, is not diminishing at all at the moment. And
yeah, I hadn't realised the number of these scam locations where they have very large scam farms, I guess they call them in some contexts. I hadn't realised the sheer number of people who are trafficked to those locations and end up scamming, not because they want to, but because they're made to do so in a form of slavery, really. And I think that is also the other end of the shocking nature of it, is to realise that there's large numbers of people being abused in that way.
Absolutely. And turning to you, Nathan, obviously you've been to a number of these conferences in the past.
Yeah.
What was, would you say, was significant for you this time round in terms of anything that was new or jumped out in terms of where things are going?
So I'm always very impressed by a gentleman called Paul Raffle who presents there. And he presents he's an analyst, a senior analyst, and he presents his findings on a number of different scams, and he looks at it from the victim's point of view. And the focus that he has, that he presents at these summits, is around young children who have been victims of these scams. And oftentimes these young children will have taken their lives. And for me as a parent with two young children, that's quite eye-opening. And so I always look forward to hearing about what measures I could take as a parent to help protect my own children from falling victim to these same scams. And one thing that piqued my interest were in his presentation this year is an initiative that he's starting with a number of different organisations to create a platform where schools can be more engaged in sharing about how you can deal with these tough subjects. And so one thing that I'm going to do personally is interact with this platform, this program that he's putting together and will be coming online, I think, in a couple of months, and sharing that with my local school, and trying to get them more involved, and making sure that they have space within the school for kids to talk, but also to educate the kids on what they should be aware of and how they should treat those with whom they interact with online.
Yeah, and we're all parents in the room today, as it happens, differing ages of children. I'm sure that we can all speak sort of differently, but it's very clear that this is becoming much more of an agenda in schools. I mean, I certainly for the younger children, maybe the last 3 or 4 years particularly, but it seems that my children are coming home now having had sort of safety-orientated sessions about safety online, about not interacting with people you don't know. So I think, and I wonder whether that will be one of the big keys in turning the tide on scams and fraud, is actually, an awareness of this, for the next generation. But yeah, it's good that there's a focus on that, isn't it? In terms of
there is, and whilst we should, always, put our efforts on, trying to prevent people from, attacking innocent people, innocent victims. There is a level of education that needs to happen for all of us, not just children, to make us aware of, some of the techniques that the scammers use to try and entrap us. So, yeah. Yeah.
And would you say, Nathan, that the tide is turning a bit in terms of scams, or is the message for the conference really that the numbers are still rising in terms of the...
I think the message, as it has been the last couple of years, is that still more needs to be done, and the sharing of information between these large organisations is one key aspect that's missing, that we try to address at the Global Signal Exchange. But really, all of the different organisations who control pieces of the internet, they don't see the whole picture from their own perspective. There is a broader picture that needs to be shared in order to help deal with this. So I think whilst people are making, the best effort that they can, there will still always be room for improvement, and, things need to happen and change.
I think, exactly. A collaborative mindset is going to be required. Yeah. Is that something, Simon, that you picked up at the conference, that there's more of an appetite for collaboration in this sort of era we're in now?
Yes, I found that there is an openness from government, there's an openness from the big tech companies, there's an openness from those who have organisations that represent things like financial services and areas like that. I think everyone's realised that this is too big an issue and also too complex an issue for them to deal with it alone, and that the only way to do it is to collaborate. And then it's just how you do the rules of engagement to make sure people are all comfortable sharing and working together, because there's also lots of privacy issues and lots of commercial issues as well. So I think it'll get there. It's somewhat slowed down by those sorts of issues and the concerns that people have. Yeah. And sometimes lawyers are paid to do stuff to do with the law, and therefore they want to make sure things are done really perfectly, which can make them very long-winded.
Yes, and I think the additional complexities of our sort of mission to be sort of both cross-border and cross-sector sort of makes that even more complicated. But I think, I guess this came through hopefully at the conference as well. But the necessity for that to happen is what's going to really solve the problem. It being a global, coordinated effort across all sectors is what's going to really sort of turn the tide on this big problem.